What if I told you that being 1 minute late could change an entire life? Charlotte ran down the wrong hallway, pushed open the wrong door, and came face to face with the most dangerous sight in Manhattan. Liam Kensington, the company's ruthless CEO, stepping out of the shower with water droplets running down his sculpted body. Their eyes met. The air grew thick. And in that endless second, they both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. But what happened next? Neither of them was ready for that. If this story has already sparked your curiosity, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? Your support is what keeps this channel alive. Charlotte Reed had never felt as small as she did in that moment, standing in the middle of Kensington & Co.'s imposing lobby. The Italian marble reflected the golden lights from the crystal chandelier, and each step echoed like a reminder that she didn't belong in this world of power and elegance. Her hands were sweating as she clutched the cheap leather folder she had bought the night before, and her navy blue dress, the most formal one she owned, suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of all that sophistication. 28th floor, room 2804, she murmured to herself, repeating the address she had memorized the night before. The elevator rose in silence, and Charlotte tried to control her nerves. It was her first day as an executive assistant, an opportunity that had appeared like a miracle in her life of financial struggles. She couldn't mess everything up, but fate had other plans. The 28th floor hallway stretched in two directions, and Charlotte hesitated. Left or right? The room number was smudged on her notes because of the sweat from her nervous hands. The watch on her wrist showed 8:47 a.m. She was already 17 minutes late. Panic took hold of her. "Please don't let me ruin everything on the first day," she whispered, instinctively choosing the right corridor. Her legs trembled as she walked quickly, looking for room 2804. But the numbers seemed to be out of order, and her anxiety grew with each passing second. When she finally found a door with a sign that seemed to match what she was looking for, Charlotte didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open forcefully. Hot steam hit her face immediately. For a moment, she stood paralyzed, trying to process what she was seeing. It wasn't an office, it was a luxurious locker room with dark wood lockers, gleaming mirrors, and a soft scent of expensive soap mixed with shower steam. And right in front of her, stepping out of the shower with a white towel around his waist, was a man who looked like he had walked out of a Greek sculpture. Time stopped. Water droplets ran down the defined muscles of his chest, slowly descending his rigid abs until they disappeared into the towel that hung dangerously low on his hips. His dark hair was wet, stuck to his forehead, and when he looked up, Charlotte felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Dark brown eyes, intense as a storm, fixed on her with a mixture of surprise and something more primitive that she couldn't identify. For long seconds, they simply stared at each other, and Charlotte felt the air escape from her lungs. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing here?" His voice was deep, controlled, but loaded with an authority that made Charlotte instinctively step back. I... The words refused to come out. Charlotte felt her face burn with shame, and something else she preferred not to analyze. Her eyes betrayed her, quickly sliding over the wet body in front of her before returning to his face, which now displayed an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry. I was looking for room 2804 and..." Her voice came out higher than normal. "I'm Charlotte Reed, the new executive assistant." Something changed in his expression when she said her name. His dark eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were processing important information. He took a step toward her, and Charlotte could feel the heat emanating from his still wet body. "Charlotte Reed," he repeated slowly, as if he were savoring her name. "You're in the wrong place, Miss Reed." The way he said her name made something strange happen in her stomach. Charlotte swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "I know, I'm sorry. I was late and got confused with the hallways and..." She gestured nervously. "I'll leave right now." But when she turned to go, his voice stopped her. "I'm Liam Kensington." Charlotte felt her blood freeze in her veins. Slowly, she turned to face him again. Liam Kensington, the CEO, her boss, the most powerful man in Manhattan, standing semi-naked in front of her, still dripping water from his shower. "Oh God," she whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth. An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, but his eyes remained serious, studying each of her reactions with a disturbing intensity. "Relax, Miss Reed. Accidents happen." He grabbed a white shirt hanging in the locker and put it on slowly, but not before Charlotte noticed every movement of his muscles. "But next time, maybe it would be better to knock before entering." Charlotte nodded vigorously, still in shock. Of course, this has never happened before. I'm not that kind of person." "What kind of person?" His question carried a subtle provocation that made Charlotte feel even more exposed. "The kind who invades men's locker rooms and—" She gestured vaguely in his direction. Liam finished buttoning his shirt and took another step toward her. Charlotte could smell his masculine scent, a mixture of expensive soap and something uniquely him. "And what else, Miss Reed?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with a tension that Charlotte didn't know how to interpret. She realized that she still hadn't left, that she was standing there, talking to her semi-dressed boss in a private locker room. "I should go," she said finally, but her legs seemed to have forgotten how to move. "You should," he agreed, but made no move to make her exit easier. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Room 2804 is on the 27th floor, not the 28th. 27th, she repeated mechanically. "And Miss Reed?" She stopped at the door and looked back. "Be more careful next time. Not all executives are as understanding as I am." The way he said understanding sent a shiver down her spine. Charlotte nodded once more and finally managed to leave, closing the door behind her with trembling hands. Leaning against the hallway wall, she tried to regain control of her breathing. Her heart was beating so hard that she was sure it could be heard throughout the entire floor. What had just happened? And why, even knowing she should be mortified, could part of her still feel the heat of those dark eyes burning her skin? Charlotte looked at the elevator, then at the locker room door she had left behind. Something told her that this encounter had changed everything, even before she fully understood what. 3 weeks had passed since the locker room incident, and Charlotte still felt butterflies in her stomach whenever she thought about that moment. She had settled into her routine at Kensington & Co., proving to be a competent and dedicated executive assistant, but there was something she couldn't control, the electric tension that arose whenever Liam Kensington appeared in her line of sight. Room 2804 had become both her refuge and her prison. Charlotte organized reports, scheduled meetings, and managed correspondence with impeccable efficiency, but her eyes constantly betrayed her, searching for his imposing silhouette through the glass corridors. Each morning, she dressed more carefully than necessary, choosing blouses that accentuated her waist and skirts, that highlighted her legs, always telling herself it was just professionalism. But Liam didn't make things easy for her. He had developed the disturbing habit of appearing at her desk without warning, always with some urgent document or a question that could easily have been asked over the phone. Charlotte noticed that he stayed longer than necessary, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. On that particular Tuesday, Charlotte was organizing files when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The unmistakable masculine scent, and the way the air seemed to grow thicker when Liam was around, were unmistakable. "Miss Reed," his deep, silky voice sent a shiver down her spine. "I need you to review these contracts before the 3 o'clock meeting." Charlotte turned slowly, forcing herself to maintain a professional expression. Liam was leaning slightly over her desk, his arms resting on the glass surface, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The proximity was intoxicating. She could see the golden details in his brown eyes and how his navy blue tie brought out the color of his skin. "Of course, Mr. Kensington," she replied, extending her hand to take the documents. Their fingers touched briefly during the transfer, and Charlotte felt an electric shock run up her arm. From the way his eyes narrowed slightly, she knew he had felt it too. "Liam," he corrected softly, "I think we've moved past excessive formality, don't you agree?" His name came from her lips like an involuntary caress. Liam. For a moment they stood there, looking at each other, and Charlotte felt like she was on the edge of a precipice. The office around them seemed to disappear, leaving only that space charged with sexual tension and dangerous possibilities. "Do you have any questions about the contracts?" Liam asked. but his voice had acquired a huskier quality, as if he too was fighting against something. Charlotte swallowed hard, trying to focus on the papers in her hands instead of the heat emanating from his body. "No, I think I can handle it." "I'm sure you can." The way he said it, with a confidence that bordered on admiration, made something stir in her chest. "You've been doing exceptionally well, Charlotte." The sound of her name on his lips was like music, intimate and dangerous. Charlotte felt her face heat up and forced herself to focus on the documents. "Thank you. I really love what I do." "And what else do you love?" The question came out more personal than professional, and when Charlotte looked up, she found Liam studying her with genuine curiosity that went beyond the boundaries of a boss-employee relationship. Charlotte hesitated, aware that they were navigating dangerous waters. I like to read, and walking in Central Park on Sundays." "Alone?" The question carried a weight she couldn't ignore. "Usually, yes." Liam nodded slowly, as if processing important information. "Central Park can be lonely on Sundays. Sometimes solitude is refreshing," Charlotte replied, though the word lonely had taken on a completely different meaning since she'd started working there. "Sometimes," he agreed, but there was something in his voice that suggested he understood exactly what she was talking about. "And other times, it can be incomplete." The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. Charlotte could hear her own heart beating and wondered if Liam could hear it too. She realized she had leaned slightly toward him, as if a magnetic force was pulling her to him. "Mr. Kensington." The receptionist's voice through the intercom broke the moment like a bucket of cold water. "Your 2:30 meeting arrived early." Liam stepped away from her desk, but his eyes remained fixed on Charlotte's face for a few more seconds. "Of course, send them up." He turned to leave but stopped at his office door. "Charlotte." "Yes?" "Those contracts. If you have any questions at all, you can come to me. Anytime." The way he emphasized any questions and any time made it clear that the offer went beyond professional matters. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice to respond adequately. After he disappeared into his office, Charlotte sat there, trying to regain control of her breathing. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held the contracts, and she realized she had barely breathed during the entire conversation. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of distraction. Charlotte tried to concentrate on work, but her mind kept returning to those moments of charged tension. Every time Liam passed by her desk, and he seemed to find reasons to do so with suspicious frequency, she felt that same electric shock. At 5 in the afternoon, the office began to empty. Charlotte remained at her desk, pretending to be busy with reports, but actually watching Liam through the glass walls of his office. He had taken off his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing muscular forearms that did strange things to her concentration. "Still working?" His voice surprised her again. Charlotte looked up and found him standing next to her desk, tie loosened, and an expression that mixed fatigue with something more intense. "Just finishing up some details," she lied, quickly closing the file she was actually just staring at without seeing. "You work too hard?" Liam observed, leaning against the edge of her desk. The proximity made Charlotte hyper-aware of every detail, the smell of his cologne mixed with his natural scent, the way his shirt stretched slightly over his broad chest, the way he looked at her as if he could see through all her carefully constructed defenses. "It's important to do good work," Charlotte replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It is," he agreed, "but it's also important to relax." The word relax came from his lips like a suggestion, and Charlotte felt a wave of heat spread through her body. She stood up abruptly, needing distance to think clearly. "I should go," she said, starting to gather her things. Liam didn't move, continuing to lean against her desk, watching her every movement with disturbing attention. "Charlotte." She stopped, her hands freezing over her purse. "Yes? Be careful going home." It was a simple phrase, almost casual, but the way he said it, with genuine concern and something that seemed like intimate closeness, made Charlotte's heart race. "Thank you," she whispered, finally finding the courage to look directly at him. For an eternal moment they looked at each other across the silent office, and Charlotte had the unmistakable feeling that they were on the verge of something that would change everything forever. The tension between them had grown beyond control, transforming into something almost tangible that hung in the air like a dangerous promise. When Charlotte finally left the building that night, she knew she had crossed an invisible line. The attraction was no longer something she could pretend didn't exist. It was real, it was mutual, and it was getting stronger with every exchanged glance. And for the first time since she had started working at Kensington & Co., Charlotte wondered if she would be able to resist much longer. Friday, 10:30 p.m. The Kensington & Co. office was immersed in an almost sepulchral silence, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning and the occasional sound of cars passing on the street below. Charlotte should have gone home hours ago, but the quarterly report needed to be ready for Monday's meeting, and she had volunteered to stay until it was finished. Actually, that wasn't the whole truth. When Liam casually mentioned that he would also be working late, something inside her had whispered an excuse to extend her own stay. Now, with most of the building empty and only the soft light from her desk illuminating her workstation, Charlotte was beginning to question the wisdom of that decision. Through the glass walls she could see him in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, one hand running through his dark hair in a gesture of fatigue she had learned to recognize. His tie was completely undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and the first 3 buttons of his shirt were open, revealing a tempting glimpse of the tanned skin underneath. Charlotte forced herself to return her attention to the numbers on the computer screen, but the spreadsheets might as well have been in hieroglyphics for all she could understand. Her concentration had deteriorated progressively throughout the night, especially after Liam had brought her coffee around 9, staying long enough beside her desk for her to feel the heat of his body and the masculine scent that left her slightly dizzy. "Still awake over there?" His voice echoed through the silent office, making her jump slightly. Charlotte looked up and found him standing in his office doorway, shoulders leaning against the frame in a way that should have been casual, but somehow managed to be intensely sexy. The soft light from the hallway created interesting shadows on his face, accentuating the strong line of his jaw and making his dark eyes seem even deeper. "Trying to finish this report," she replied, gesturing vaguely at the screen. "You know how it is? Numbers that won't stop dancing on the screen." Liam chuckled softly, a deep sound that sent strange vibrations through her chest. "I know that feeling well." He approached her desk with slow, deliberate steps, like a predator who wasn't in a hurry, because he already knew his prey had nowhere to run. Charlotte felt her breathing become more shallow with each step he took. "Can I take a look?" Liam asked, but he was already walking around the desk to stand behind her chair. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. When he leaned over her to see the screen, his cologne enveloped her completely, a mixture of wood, spices, and something uniquely masculine that made her senses panic. She could feel the heat of his body radiating through his shirt, and when he placed a hand on the desk beside the keyboard, she was practically trapped between his arms. "This number here," Liam murmured, pointing to something on the screen, but Charlotte could barely concentrate on his words. His voice was deeper than normal, huskier, and she could feel his warm breath against her ear. "Needs to be adjusted based on last quarter's projection." "Oh," Charlotte whispered, trying desperately to focus on the numbers instead of his disturbing proximity. "Of course, I hadn't noticed that." "It's easy to miss," Liam said. But when Charlotte turned her head slightly to respond, she discovered he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking directly at her, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart stop for a moment. They were dangerously close. Too close. Charlotte could see the golden details in his eyes, the way his pupils had dilated slightly, the perfect line of his lips that suddenly became the center of all her attention. "Charlotte," he said softly, and something in the way he pronounced her name, like a prayer or a confession, made something break inside her. "Yes?" The word came out as a whisper, loaded with a vulnerability she hadn't intended to reveal. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. They simply looked at each other. Charlotte could hear her own heart beating like a drum in her ears, could feel her pulse racing in her neck, could see the internal struggle reflected in Liam's dark eyes. "This is a terrible idea," he murmured. But even as he said it, his free hand rose to gently touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with a delicacy that completely contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. "The worst possible," Charlotte agreed, But her voice came out unsteady and she involuntarily leaned into his touch. "You're my employee," Liam continued, as if he were listing all the reasons he should walk away. But his fingers continued exploring her skin, descending along the curve of her neck in a way that made Charlotte tremble. "You're my boss," she whispered back, but her words carried no conviction. They sounded more like surrender. "This is going to complicate everything," he said, his thumb tracing the outline of her lips with torturous slowness. "Everything," she agreed, but when she slightly parted her lips under his touch, she saw something break definitively in Liam's expression. "Then destroy me," he murmured, echoing the words she had said weeks before in the locker room, but now they carried a completely different weight. A promise, a challenge, a surrender. When Liam finally kissed her, it was as if a dam had burst. It wasn't gentle or hesitant, it was pure hunger. Weeks of accumulated tension exploding in a moment of contact that made Charlotte feel like she was catching fire. He kissed her like a thirsty man drinking water, like someone who had been holding back for too long and had finally found permission to surrender. Charlotte responded with equal intensity, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer, as if physical proximity could somehow relieve the desperate need that had been growing inside her for weeks. He tasted intoxicating, coffee, and something uniquely masculine that made her head spin. Liam pulled her from the chair without breaking the kiss, his strong hands gripping her waist, pressing her against him until Charlotte could feel every hard line of his body against hers. She could feel his heart beating against her chest, fast and strong, echoing the desperate rhythm of her own. "God, Charlotte," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough with desire. "You have no idea what you've been doing to me." Instead of responding with words, Charlotte kissed him again, pouring weeks of repressed desire, sleepless nights and forbidden fantasies into that kiss. It was wrong, it was dangerous, it was exactly the kind of complication she had sworn to avoid when she accepted the job. But in that moment, with Liam's body pressed against hers and the taste of him on her lips, Charlotte discovered she didn't care about the consequences. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Liam rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were trying to regain control. "This changes everything," he said quietly, his hands still holding her face with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of what had just happened. "I know," Charlotte whispered back, her own hands still tangled in his hair. "There's no going back," he continued, opening his eyes to look directly into hers. "Once we cross this line—" "I don't want to go back," Charlotte interrupted him, surprising herself with the conviction in her own voice. "I don't want to pretend anymore that this isn't happening." Something lit up in Liam's dark eyes, relief perhaps, or something close to gratitude. He kissed her again, more softly this time, but no less intense. It was a kiss that sealed an agreement, that marked the beginning of something they both knew would be complicated and dangerous, but that neither had the strength to resist. When they separated for the second time, Charlotte knew she had crossed a point of no return. Whatever came next, the complications, the risks, the inevitable consequences, she would face them, because for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. And from the gleam in Liam's eyes, she suspected he was feeling exactly the same thing. Mondays always brought a particular energy to Kensington & Co., but this specific one carried something different in the air, a tension that Charlotte couldn't completely identify. There was a subtle agitation among the employees, whispers in the hallways, and furtive glances that seemed to converge toward the executive elevator. Charlotte was organizing Liam's schedule when Marcus, the assistant from the legal department, appeared at her desk with an expression that mixed curiosity with something close to nervousness. "Have you ever heard of Lucinda Prescott?" he asked in a low voice, looking around as if he feared being overheard. The name wasn't familiar, but something in the way Marcus pronounced it, with a mixture of reverence and caution, made Charlotte pay attention. "No. Why?" "She's here," Marcus whispered dramatically. "On the 32nd floor, meeting with the board. And from the rumors going around, it's not a social visit." Before Charlotte could ask for more details, her desk phone rang. Liam's voice, normally controlled and confident, carried a note of tension she had learned to recognize. "Charlotte, I need you to cancel my 10 o'clock meeting and reorganize my schedule for this afternoon and—" He hesitated, which was unusual for him. "Prepare the smaller conference room. I'll have an important meeting in an hour." "Of course," Charlotte replied automatically, already jotting down the changes. "Anything else you need?" There was a pause long enough for Charlotte to wonder if the call had dropped. When Liam finally responded, his voice was strangely formal. "Just stay available. It might be a long afternoon." The call ended before Charlotte could respond, leaving her with a feeling of unease she couldn't explain. It was gradually that Charlotte began putting together the puzzle of who Lucinda Prescott was. Through fragmented conversations at the coffee machine and casual comments from older colleagues, she discovered that Lucinda had been a constant presence in Liam's life for years, first as a business partner, then as something more. Much more. "They were Manhattan's power couple for almost 3 years, explained Sarah from accounting during lunch. "Beautiful, rich, ruthless in business. Everyone thought they were going to get married." "What happened?" Charlotte asked, trying to sound casual despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Nobody knows for sure. Suddenly she just disappeared from his life, moved to London, started her own company. But from the rumors—" Sarah leaned closer. "She never really got over Liam." Charlotte spent the rest of the afternoon trying to concentrate on work, but her mind kept returning to that conversation. There was something about the idea of Lucinda Prescott that deeply bothered her. Not just jealousy, though there was certainly that, but a primitive intuition that this woman's arrival meant nothing good. At 3 in the afternoon, Charlotte got her first glimpse of Lucinda Prescott. She emerged from the elevator like an apparition, tall, elegant, wearing a beige-tailored suit that probably cost more than Charlotte's monthly salary. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an impeccable chignon, her makeup was subtle but perfect, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. But it was her eyes that most impressed Charlotte, blue as ice, intelligent and calculating, sweeping the office with the precision of a predator assessing familiar territory. "You must be the new assistant," Lucinda said, stopping directly in front of Charlotte's desk. Her voice was smooth, polite, but carried an underlying coldness that made Charlotte straighten instinctively. "Charlotte Reed," she replied, extending her hand professionally. Lucinda took it briefly. Her hands were soft and cold, and Charlotte had the disconcerting feeling of being evaluated like an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Lucinda Prescott," she introduced herself, though Charlotte suspected she already knew exactly who Charlotte was. "I imagine Liam is in his office?" "He's in a meeting at the moment," Charlotte replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can let him know you're here." A smile touched Lucinda's lips. Not a warm smile, but something closer to cruel amusement. "Oh, don't worry, dear. He's expecting me." And without waiting for an answer or permission, Lucinda headed directly to Liam's office, her high heels clicking against the marble floor with absolute authority. Charlotte watched, paralyzed, as Lucinda opened Liam's office door without knocking and entered as if she still owned the place. Through the glass walls, she could see Liam rising from behind his desk, his expression changing from surprise to something more complex when Lucinda closed the door behind her. For the next hour, Charlotte tried to work, but her eyes kept being drawn to Liam's office. Through the glass, she could see silhouettes. Lucinda sitting gracefully in the chair across from his desk, Liam pacing back and forth like a caged beast. Their expressions were serious, occasionally tense, and Charlotte hated herself for desperately wanting to know what they were talking about. When Lucinda finally emerged from the office, she looked even more composed than when she had entered. She headed directly to Charlotte's desk, who tried to appear busy with papers. "Charlotte, isn't it?" Lucinda said, her voice carrying a false sweetness that put all of Charlotte's instincts on high alert. "Yes," Charlotte replied carefully. "What a lovely name." Lucinda leaned slightly over the desk, and Charlotte could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and costly that somehow managed to smell like superiority. "Tell me, dear, are you enjoying working here?" "Very much," Charlotte replied, not knowing where the conversation was headed but instinctively knowing it was dangerous territory. "How nice," Lucinda said, her smile widening in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Kensington & Co. has always been careful to, how can I put it, take good care of its employees, especially those who show special dedication. The way she emphasized special dedication made Charlotte feel like she'd been hit with a bucket of ice water. There was something in Lucinda's words that sounded like a veiled accusation, an insinuation that Charlotte didn't want to examine too closely. Of course, Lucinda continued, examining her perfectly manicured nails, sometimes it can be challenging for young women to navigate complex corporate environments. It's so easy to misinterpret professional attention, don't you agree? Charlotte felt blood rush to her face. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, I'm sure you don't. Lucinda laughed lightly. You seem like a smart girl, and Liam has always had a, let's say, weakness for damsels in distress. It's almost chivalrous, really. Before Charlotte could respond, Liam's voice echoed from his office. Lucinda, do you have a minute? Lucinda straightened, her smile transforming into something more genuine and somehow more threatening. Of course, darling. She turned to leave but stopped and looked over her shoulder at Charlotte. It was a pleasure meeting you, Charlotte. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. As Lucinda walked away, Charlotte sat at her desk feeling like she'd been run over by an elegant, perfumed train. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to return to work, and she realized she had just met her first real enemy at Kensington & Co. And from the satisfied smile Lucinda had given before disappearing into the elevator, Charlotte suspected this encounter had been just the beginning. Wednesday started like any other day, but Charlotte should have noticed the signs, the whispers that stopped abruptly when she walked through the hallways, the furtive glances that followed her from the moment she stepped off the elevator, the way Sarah from accounting avoided her gaze during the coffee break. She was reviewing reports when she received the first real clue that something was terribly wrong. Charlotte, Marcus's tense voice made her look up. He was standing beside her desk, holding his phone with an expression that mixed embarrassment with something close to compassion. Did you check your email this morning? Haven't had a chance yet, Charlotte replied, feeling a strange chill settle in her stomach. Why? Marcus hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other uncomfortably. Maybe you should take a look. There are some things going around. With fingers that were beginning to tremble, Charlotte opened her email client. At the top of her inbox was a message from an address she didn't recognize, with the subject line, Confidential Information, Kensington & Co. The first email was just the beginning. Interesting how certain employees get promotions so quickly at Kensington & Co.'s, especially those who work overtime very close to the CEO. Some of us have noticed the late-night meetings in the office. Professional ethics seems to be declining around here. Charlotte felt her blood freeze in her veins. With trembling hands, she scrolled down, finding more similar messages that had been sent not just to her, but apparently to the entire company. It's surprising how some people get special access to the 32nd floor, especially considering Charlotte Reed was hired just a few weeks ago. Makes you wonder what kind of qualifications she really has. Did anyone else notice how Mr. Kensington started staying late at the office coincidentally at the same time as his new assistant? Professionalism at its finest, folks. Each word was like a slap. Charlotte could feel her face burning with humiliation and anger as she read the poisonous insinuations that painted her relationship with Liam as something sordid and calculating. Worse still, she could see that the messages had been sent to what appeared to be the entire company employee list. Charlotte? Marcus had moved closer to her desk, his voice low and concerned. Are you okay? She couldn't answer. Her throat seemed to have closed completely, and she felt like she was suffocating. With fingers that could barely move, she continued reading, discovering there were more emails, each one crueler and more specific than the last. Finally, in the last email of the sequence, she found the words that made her feel like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Maybe it's time everyone knew exactly what kind of special favor Charlotte Reed provided to get her position. Some of us have had access to interesting information about her real qualifications. Management should be aware of what kind of behavior is being rewarded here. Charlotte stood up so abruptly that she knocked over her chair. She needed to find Liam, needed to explain, but when she looked at his office through the glass walls, she saw he was on the phone, his expression dark and tense. Miss Reed. The formal voice made her turn. It was James Wellington, the Human Resources Director, accompanied by two other executives she vaguely recognized. "Could you come with us, please?" Charlotte felt her legs go weak. Of course." The walk to the conference room felt like an eternity. Charlotte was aware of all the stares following her, the whispered conversations that stopped when she passed, the way some colleagues looked away as if she had become radioactive. In the conference room, James opened a folder in front of him. "Miss Reed, I'm sure you're aware of the emails that circulated this morning." "I am," Charlotte managed to say, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "While the company doesn't endorse or tolerate this type of anonymous communication," James continued carefully, "we are obligated to investigate any allegations of inappropriate conduct, especially when it involves relationships between supervisors and subordinates." "I didn't do anything wrong," Charlotte said, though her own voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. "No one is suggesting you did," one of the other executives intervened diplomatically. "But given the nature of the allegations and the current environment, we think it would be best for everyone involved if you took a few days off while we conduct a thorough investigation." Charlotte felt the world crumble around her. "You're suspending me?" "It's a temporary measure," James said quickly, "just until we can resolve this situation." Based on anonymous emails, anger finally began to break through the shock. "Someone is clearly trying to hurt me, and you're letting it happen." "We understand your frustration," the third executive said calmly. "But considering the sensitive nature of the situation—" "The sensitive nature," Charlotte interrupted, her voice rising. "Someone is destroying my reputation with lies, and you're punishing me for it." Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened. Liam entered like a storm, his expression angrier than Charlotte had ever seen. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his eyes sweeping the room before fixing on Charlotte. She could see anger and something that looked like genuine concern in his gaze. "Mr. Kensington," James began nervously, "we were just following protocol." "Protocol?" Liam cut him off. "You're suspending an excellent employee based on cowardly anonymous emails?" "Given the allegations about the nature of your relationship," one of the executives began. "What allegations?" Liam demanded, his voice dangerously low. "That I have confidence in a competent employee, that she stays late because she's dedicated to her work? What a terrible crime." Charlotte watched Liam's passionate defense with a mixture of gratitude and despair. He was fighting for her, but this would only make the speculation worse. "Mr. Kensington," she said quietly, "maybe it's better if I take a few days anyway, until this gets resolved." Liam turned to her, his dark eyes full of something she couldn't completely identify. For a moment she thought he would fight more, would refuse to let her go, but then he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." It wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to go back in time and prevent any of this from happening. But now, with the entire company whispering about her, with her reputation in pieces on the floor, Charlotte didn't know if there was a way back. When she left the building 20 minutes later, carrying a small box with her personal belongings, Charlotte felt like she was leaving behind more than just a job. She was leaving behind her dignity, her confidence, and perhaps the only real chance at happiness she'd had in years. And somewhere up there, Lucinda Prescott was probably smiling. 1 week. 7 hellish days had passed since Charlotte had left Kensington & Co., carrying a cardboard box with her few personal belongings. 7 days of deafening silence, of a phone that didn't ring, of a loneliness that seemed to swallow her small Brooklyn apartment. She was trying to distract herself by organizing her resume for the 10th time when the news exploded. Massive leak of confidential data from Kensington & Co. exposes million-dollar merger strategies, screamed the Financial Times headline on her laptop screen. Internal documents reveal secret negotiations that could impact the global market. Charlotte felt her blood freeze in her veins as she read the article. Confidential contracts, internal emails, negotiation strategies she had helped type. Everything was being exposed in minute detail by the financial press. Her first reaction was horror at what this would mean for Liam and the company. Her second reaction was pure terror when she realized the implication. The phone rang before she could fully process what was happening. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something in her intuition made her answer. Charlotte Reed. The voice was formal, official. "Yes? This is Detective Martinez from the New York Financial Crimes Department. We'd like to speak with you about the recent information leaks from Kensington & Co." The world seemed to collapse around her. What? Some documents suggest you had access to the materials that were leaked. We'd like to clarify a few things. Can you come to the station this afternoon? Charlotte could barely respond. When she hung up the phone, her hands were shaking so much she almost dropped the device. They suspected her. Obviously, they suspected her. The newly hired employee who had been suspended amid scandal, who had access to the documents, who had reasons to be resentful. 2 hours later, sitting in a cold, windowless interrogation room, Charlotte felt like she was living a nightmare. The detectives were professional, but their questions were sharp as blades. "Did you have access to these specific documents?" Detective Martinez showed a list that made Charlotte's stomach churn. "Yes, but only as part of my job. I never..." "Were you resentful toward the company after your suspension?" "Of course I was upset, but I would never..." "Did you keep copies of work files on your personal devices?" The question hit her like lightning. Charlotte vaguely remembered sending some documents to her personal email to work from home during some long nights. It was a violation of company policies, but something many employees did occasionally. Sometimes, to work from home." She saw the detectives exchange meaningful glances and knew she had just dug her own grave. When she finally left the station 3 hours later, with instructions not to leave the city while the investigation continued, Charlotte felt numb. She walked through Manhattan streets in a daze, barely conscious of where she was going until she realized she had stopped in front of the Kensington & Co. building. That's when she saw him. Liam was leaving the building, surrounded by lawyers and executives, his face a mask of controlled tension. Even from a distance, Charlotte could see he had lost weight, that there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment Charlotte felt a spark of hope. Maybe he would come to her, maybe they could talk, maybe... But then she saw the expression on his face change. Something closed in his eyes, a coldness she had never seen before settled into his features. Liam looked away and got into the limousine without a word, without a gesture, as if she were a stranger. Charlotte stood there on the sidewalk, watching the car's taillights disappear into traffic, feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. That night, alone in her apartment, she called him. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. On the third attempt, an automated message informed her that the number had been changed. That's when reality hit her completely. Liam had changed his number. He was avoiding her. After everything that had happened between them, after all the whispered promises and intimate moments, he had simply cut contact. Charlotte let herself fall onto the couch, finally allowing the tears to come. She cried for the injustice of the entire situation, for the cruelty of the accusations, for the loss of her job and reputation, but mainly, she cried for the loss of Liam, because in that moment, she understood she had lost more than a job or a career. She had lost the man she loved, the man who apparently had decided she wasn't worth the risk, that the problems she brought were greater than anything they could have together. 3 days later, the news got worse. The tabloids had discovered her identity and were painting her as the vengeful assistant who tried to destroy her billionaire ex-boss. Photos of her leaving the police station were scattered across the internet, accompanied by cruel speculation about her motives and character. Charlotte stopped leaving home, stopped answering the phone, stopped checking emails or social media. She took refuge in her apartment like a wounded animal, trying to understand how her life had disintegrated so completely in a matter of weeks. It was during one of these dark nights that she found a letter that had been slipped under her door. There was no return address, just her name written in elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. "Dear Charlotte, I hope you're finding time for reflection during this difficult period. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most painful experiences. Perhaps now you understand that some worlds simply aren't made for certain people. With sincere regards, a concerned friend." Charlotte didn't need a signature to know who had written the letter. Lucinda Prescott had gotten exactly what she wanted. She had destroyed Charlotte completely, had separated her from Liam and now was savoring her victory. That night, Charlotte lay in her empty bed and allowed herself to imagine, for the last time, how it would have been if things were different. If there were no Lucinda, if there were no scandals, if there were no suspicions and painful separations. But when the sun rose the next morning, Charlotte made a decision. She wasn't going to let Lucinda Prescott win completely. Somehow, some way, she was going to discover the truth and clear her name, even if it meant facing a man who had chosen to doubt her when she most needed him to believe. 3 weeks had passed since the interrogation at the police station, and Charlotte had almost given up any hope of redemption when her phone rang on a rainy Thursday morning. The number was unknown, but something made her answer. "Charlotte, it's Margaret from reception at Kensington & Co." The older woman's voice was tense, almost whispering. "I know I shouldn't be calling, but can you meet me? It's about what happened to you." An hour later, Charlotte was sitting in a small, discreet cafe in the Lower East Side, watching Margaret nervously stir her tea. The woman had worked at Kensington & Co. for over 20 years, knew all the building's secrets, and Charlotte had always liked her maternal nature. "I haven't been able to sleep properly," Margaret began, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly around the cup. "Knowing what I know and seeing what they did to you. It's not right, Charlotte. It's just not right." "Margaret, what do you know?" Charlotte leaned forward, feeling the first spark of hope in weeks. "It's about the anonymous emails, dear, and about the leaked documents." Margaret looked around nervously before continuing. "I work very late sometimes, you know. I like the peace of the empty office, and the night before those horrible emails were sent, I saw something." Charlotte felt her heart race. "What did you see?" "It was almost midnight when I heard the elevator. I thought it was strange because the building should have been empty, so I looked at the security cameras." Margaret paused as if gathering courage. It was Lucinda Prescott. She was using a badge that wasn't hers. I could see on the cameras that it was a temporary badge, probably gotten from some executive. Charlotte's blood began to boil. She was in the building without authorization. More than that, dear. She went straight to the executive floor, and I saw her entering your workspace. She stayed there for almost an hour. Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The next day, the emails appeared, and a week later the documents were leaked." Charlotte felt a mixture of anger and relief coursing through her veins. Finally, there was proof that Lucinda was behind everything. "Margaret, do you still have access to the camera recordings?" The older woman shook her head sadly. "They automatically delete after 2 weeks, but..." She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "I made copies. I saved them on a flash drive because something told me it would be important." Charlotte almost knocked over her coffee cup. "You have proof?" "I do. And more than that, I was able to trace the IP address of the anonymous emails through the company system. They all came from the same computer, a laptop that was connected to our Wi-Fi network the same night Lucinda was there." The puzzle pieces began to fall into place in Charlotte's mind. Lucinda had planned everything meticulously. She had used her access to the building to hack the system, steal confidential information, and then orchestrated both the email scandal and the subsequent leak to completely destroy Charlotte's reputation. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" Charlotte asked. Margaret looked ashamed. "I was scared. Lucinda Prescott is a powerful woman with connections everywhere, and I'm just a receptionist close to retirement. Who would believe me?" "I believe you," Charlotte said firmly, "and we're going to make everyone believe." 2 hours later, Charlotte was at the police station again, but this time as a complainant, not as a suspect. Detective Martinez examined the evidence Margaret had provided with growing interest. "This is quite damning," he admitted, looking at the security footage that clearly showed Lucinda entering the building and accessing restricted areas. "And you said you have technical evidence too." Margaret, who had found the courage to accompany Charlotte to the station, handed over a second flash drive. "Here are the system logs showing unauthorized access and the email metadata traced back to her laptop." Detective Martinez nodded slowly. "We'll need to verify all of this, of course, but if it checks out, you just gave us a solid case for corporate sabotage, trespassing, and data theft." Charlotte felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made her dizzy. Finally, the truth was coming to light. "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly. I need Mr. Kensington to know about this. He has the right to know the truth. The detective studied her carefully. I'll contact him personally, considering the nature of the case and the fact that the company was as much a victim as you were. 3 hours later, Charlotte was home when her doorbell rang. She opened the door expecting to see maybe Margaret or even another police officer. Instead, she found Liam standing in the hallway. He looked different, thinner, with deep dark circles, unshaven. His clothes, normally impeccable, were wrinkled as if he hadn't slept. But it was his eyes that shocked her most. They were filled with a mixture of relief, guilt, and something that looked like desperation. "Charlotte," he said, his voice hoarse, as if it hadn't been used for days. They looked at each other across the doorway, and Charlotte felt 3 weeks of pain, anger, and longing crashing inside her, like waves against a rocky shore. "Liam," she whispered, and suddenly couldn't say anything more. "I heard about Lucinda," he said, taking a hesitant step toward her. "The police told me everything, the evidence, what she did, how she planned it all." His voice broke slightly. "God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for doubting you." Charlotte felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to maintain control. "You cut me off," she said quietly. "When I needed you most, when my world was falling apart, you just disappeared." "I know," Liam said, running a hand through his messy hair. "I was scared that my defense of you would only make things worse, scared that our connection would be used against you. I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safer." "Safer?" Charlotte repeated, her voice rising. "Liam, I felt completely abandoned. You changed your phone number, because I knew that if I heard your voice, I would come to you, and that could ruin any chance you had of clearing yourself." He took another step toward her, his eyes pleading. "I was trying to protect you, protecting me by destroying my heart." The tears finally began to fall. "You were the only good thing that happened to me in years, and when things got tough, you ran." "You're right," Liam said simply. "I ran. I was a coward. And you're the only real thing in my life, Charlotte. The only thing that matters, and I let you go when I should have fought for you." Charlotte looked at him through her tears, seeing the sincerity and remorse in his face. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, forgive everything, and pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened. But another part of her, the part that had survived the darkest 3 weeks of her life, knew it would take more than apologies to fix what had been broken between them. "The truth came to light," she said finally. "But what you did, the way you abandoned me, that's also true, Liam." And with that, she gently closed the door, leaving him outside, knowing that while the truth had been revealed, the journey back to each other would be much more complicated than either of them imagined. 2 weeks had passed since Charlotte had closed the door in Liam's face, and he hadn't given up. Every day, without fail, flowers appeared at her door. Not extravagant and expensive arrangements, but simple and personal bouquets. White daisies on the first day, because she had mentioned once that they were her favorites. Yellow roses on the second, symbolizing friendship and a new beginning. Purple tulips on the third, with a card that simply said, "For the bravest woman I've ever known." Charlotte tried to be strong, tried to maintain her resolve, but each small and thoughtful gesture was slowly melting the walls she had built around her heart. On Friday morning, she found something different waiting for her. It wasn't flowers this time, but a handwritten letter on expensive stationery, sealed with red wax like something from a more romantic era. "Charlotte, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that words alone cannot undo the pain I caused when I abandoned you at the moment you needed me most. But I need you to know that every day without you has been a form of slow death. Lucinda was arrested this morning. The charges include corporate sabotage, data theft, defamation, and trespassing. She confessed everything, how she planned to destroy you from the moment she realized I had truly fallen in love for the first time in my life. You have been publicly exonerated. Your reputation has been completely cleared, but I know that doesn't erase what I did to you. If you'll give me a chance, just one, to explain in person, I'll be waiting at Central Park, near Bethesda Fountain, at 8 tonight. I'll be there every night until you show up or until I understand that I've lost you forever. With all my love and regret, Liam." Charlotte read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the sincerity in every word, the raw vulnerability of a man who rarely admitted being wrong. And the news about Lucinda brought a dark satisfaction. Finally, justice had been served. But it was the last part of the letter that made her heart ache. The idea of Liam waiting alone in the park, night after night, was both romantic and heartbreaking. Charlotte spent the entire day fighting with herself. Part of her wanted to run to the park immediately, throw herself into his arms, and forget all the pain of the past few weeks. But the wounded part, the part that had survived abandonment and public humiliation, insisted she should be more cautious. At 7:30 in the evening, she was standing in front of her bathroom mirror, wearing a simple blue dress, the same one she had worn the first time they had worked late together. She didn't know why she had chosen that dress specifically, but something about it felt right. Central Park was bathed in the golden light of sunset when Charlotte approached Bethesda Fountain. Her heart was beating so hard, she was sure it could be heard by everyone around. And then she saw him. Liam was sitting on a bench near the fountain, wearing dark jeans and a simple white shirt, more casual than she had ever seen him. His hands were clasped together, his shoulders tense with anticipation or anxiety. When he saw her approaching, he stood slowly, as if he couldn't believe she had actually shown up. "You came," he said softly when she stopped a few feet away. "You said you'd be here every night," Charlotte replied, keeping her voice carefully controlled. "I couldn't let you wait forever." A small, hesitant smile touched his lips. "I would have waited, forever, if necessary." They looked at each other across the space that separated them, and Charlotte could feel the familiar tension arising between them. Not just physical attraction, but something deeper, more complicated. "Liam," she began, "what you did was unforgivable," he interrupted, taking a cautious step toward her. "When you needed me most, I let fear guide my decisions instead of love. I abandoned you to protect my company, my reputation, my controlled world. And in doing so, I lost the only thing that really mattered." Charlotte felt tears burning her eyes, but forced herself to continue. "You made me feel like I was disposable, like everything we had shared was nothing." "It was never nothing," Liam said fervently, taking another step. "You're everything, Charlotte. You're the first person who made me feel something real in years. When Lucinda came back, when the scandal started, I panicked because I realized I had something to lose. And ironically, it was that fear of losing you that made me lose you anyway. So why should I believe that this time will be different?" Charlotte asked, her voice breaking slightly. "How do I know that in the next crisis you won't run away again?" Liam stopped right in front of her, so close she could feel the heat of his body, the familiar scent that always made her dizzy. "Because I learned that a life without you is no life at all. Because I'd rather face any scandal, any crisis, any public judgment with you by my side than face another day alone." He raised his hands hesitantly, gently touching her face as if she were made of glass. "Charlotte, I love you. Not just as a man loves a woman, but as someone who found his other half. You complete me in ways I didn't even know I needed to be completed." Tears finally began to stream down Charlotte's face. "Liam, I know I need to earn back your trust," he continued, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I know words aren't enough, but if you'll give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you can count on me. In the good times and the bad, in scandals and celebrations, forever." Charlotte looked into his dark eyes and saw something she hadn't seen before: complete vulnerability. Liam Kensington, the powerful CEO who controlled empires, was completely defenseless before her. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You made me feel like I wasn't worth fighting for. You're the only thing worth fighting for." Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling the final battle between her head and her heart. Her head listed all the reasons why she should protect herself, keep her distance, demand more time. But her heart was screaming a truth she could no longer deny. She loved him, completely, irrevocably, despite all the pain. "If we do this," she said finally, opening her eyes to meet his, "if we try again, it has to be real. No running at the first difficulty. No protecting me by making decisions for me. If we're together in everything." "In everything," Liam agreed immediately. "Through good times and bad, through storms and calm." And Liam. Charlotte leaned slightly closer to him. If you run from me again, there won't be a third chance. I won't run, he promised, resting his forehead against hers. Never again. When he kissed her, it was different from all the kisses they had shared before. It wasn't just passion or desire. It was forgiveness. It was promise. It was the beginning of something new built on the ashes of what had been broken. Charlotte surrendered completely to the kiss, pouring weeks of longing, pain, and hope into it. She could feel his tears mixed with hers, could feel the gratitude and relief in every touch. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Liam pulled her closer, holding her as if he would never let her go again. "You're my only weakness," he murmured against her hair, echoing words he had said months before. "Then let me be your strength," Charlotte replied, remembering her own response from that distant night. And there, under the emerging stars of Central Park, they began again, not as the same people who had fallen in love the first time, but as two people who had weathered the storm and chosen to stand together on the other side. 6 months had passed since that transformative night in Central Park, and Charlotte had to admit that Liam had kept every promise. He hadn't run when the press discovered they were together again. He hadn't hidden when some investors questioned his decision to rehire Charlotte in an even higher position at the company. And he definitely hadn't hesitated when she suggested they should be completely transparent about their relationship to avoid future scandals. Now, as the first rays of Saturday morning sun filtered through the curtains of Liam's penthouse, Charlotte stretched lazily in the king-size bed, feeling the warmth of his body beside her. They had established a routine over the past few months: Friday nights at her Brooklyn apartment, Saturdays and Sundays at his Manhattan penthouse, finding a balance between the two worlds they now shared. "Good morning, Miss Reed," Liam's sleep-husky voice murmured against her neck, his lips pressing a soft kiss just below her ear. "Good morning, Mr. Kensington," Charlotte replied, turning to face him. Even after all these months, there were still moments when she was surprised by the reality of being there, waking up in his arms. Liam studied her with that intense look she had learned to recognize. It wasn't sexual desire, though there was certainly that too, but something deeper. It was as if he still couldn't quite believe she had come back into his life. "What are you thinking about?" Charlotte asked, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "How beautiful you are in the morning," he replied, but there was something in his voice and a note of nervousness that was unusual for him. Charlotte propped herself up on her elbow, studying him more closely. "Liam, is everything okay? You seem tense." He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Can't I just appreciate the woman I love on a Saturday morning?" "You can," Charlotte said slowly, "but there's something different. You've been acting strange all week. Whispered phone calls, mysterious meetings, and yesterday you left for 2 hours and refused to tell me where you went." Liam laughed nervously, running a hand through his messy hair. "You know me too well." "I hope so. We're supposedly a couple with no secrets, remember?" Charlotte sat up in bed, pulling the sheet to cover her chest. "Liam, you're making me worried. If something's wrong—" "Nothing's wrong," he said quickly, sitting up too. "It's just that—" "Charlotte, you love me, right?" The question caught her by surprise. "Of course I love you. Why would you ask that? And you see a future with us? A real, permanent future?" Charlotte felt a twinge of concern. This conversation was taking a direction she hadn't expected. "Liam, where are you going with this?" Instead of answering, Liam got up from the bed and began pacing around the room, clearly agitated. Charlotte watched him, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept running his hands through his hair. "Liam, you're scaring me," she said gently. "Please, just tell me what's going on." He stopped pacing and turned to her, and Charlotte was surprised to see genuine vulnerability in his dark eyes. "Charlotte, before you, I never thought about marriage, never wanted it. I thought it was an antiquated institution, a way to complicate something that should be simple." Charlotte's heart began to beat faster. "And now?" "Now," Liam said, approaching the bed slowly, "I can't imagine a single day of my life without you in it, not as a girlfriend, not as a temporary partner, but as my wife." Charlotte felt the air leave her lungs. "Liam, I know we're still rebuilding. I know it's only been 6 months since we got back together. But Charlotte—" He knelt beside the bed, taking her hands in his. I already lost you once for being a coward. I don't want to waste another day pretending I don't know exactly what I want." With movements that seemed to be in slow motion, Liam stood and walked to the dresser. When he turned back to her, he was holding a small navy blue velvet box. "Oh my God," Charlotte whispered, bringing a hand to her mouth. Liam returned to the side of the bed and knelt again, this time formally, on one knee. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the box, revealing a ring that took Charlotte's breath away. It wasn't the ostentatious, huge ring she might have expected from a billionaire. Instead, it was elegant and timeless, a perfectly cut oval solitaire diamond set in a simple platinum band. It was exactly the type of ring she would have chosen for herself if she had ever allowed herself to dream of this moment. "Charlotte Reed," Liam began, his voice softer and more sincere than she had ever heard it. "You came into my life like a hurricane and changed everything. You taught me what it means to love someone more than myself. You forgave me when I didn't deserve forgiveness and gave me a second chance when I had wasted the first." Tears began to stream down Charlotte's face, but she didn't wipe them away. She was completely focused on the man kneeling before her, on the man who was giving his heart so completely and vulnerably. "You make me want to be a better man," Liam continued. "You make me want to build something lasting, something real. You're my partner, my equal, my best friend, and the love of my life." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "So I'm asking, on the most important morning of my life, Charlotte Reed, will you marry me?" For a moment that seemed to stretch through eternity, Charlotte was silent. Not because she was hesitating, but because she was absorbing the magnitude of the moment. This was Liam Kensington, the man who had sworn never to marry, kneeling in his bedroom, offering her not just a ring, but his complete heart and his future. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Liam, 1,000 times yes." The relief that passed over Liam's face was so intense that Charlotte realized that despite all his apparent confidence, he had genuinely feared she might say no. With hands trembling with emotion, Liam removed the ring from the box and gently slid it onto Charlotte's left ring finger. It was a perfect fit, of course. He had somehow discovered her exact size. "How did you—" Charlotte began, looking at the ring that captured the morning light dazzlingly. "I borrowed one of your other rings 2 weeks ago," Liam admitted, with an embarrassed smile. "And it may have taken 6 tries at different jewelry stores until I found something that seemed you." Charlotte laughed through her tears, now understanding all the mysterious outings and whispered conversations. "That's why you've been so strange. Buying an engagement ring is surprisingly stressful when you want it to be perfect," Liam admitted, finally standing and sitting on the bed beside her. Charlotte extended her hand, admiring how the ring looked natural on her finger, as if it had always belonged there. "Liam, it's beautiful. It's perfect." "You're perfect," he said softly, pulling her closer. "And somehow, miraculously, you said yes." "It would always be yes," Charlotte said, looking directly into his eyes. "No matter when you asked, no matter how, it would always be yes. Because you're my future, Liam, you're my home." When he kissed her, it was with the passion of a man who had just had his greatest dream fulfilled. And when they finally separated, both were smiling through tears. "So," Liam said, gently kissing her fingers just above the ring, "when do you want to marry a billionaire CEO who's a little neurotic?" Charlotte laughed, feeling a happiness so pure and complete it almost made her dizzy. "How about yesterday?" "Yesterday might be impossible," Liam said with a smile, "but I could arrange something for next week." And for the first time since they'd met, Charlotte completely believed he would do exactly that, because finally they had found their happy ending. 3 months after the proposal, on a golden autumn morning that seemed to have been painted especially for the occasion, Charlotte Reed stood before the full-length mirror in the bridal suite at the Plaza Hotel, barely able to believe that the radiant woman in the reflection was herself. The dress she had chosen was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity, ivory satin that flowed like water, a subtle V neckline, long sleeves of delicate lace, and a train that gracefully extended behind her. It wasn't the most extravagant dress Liam's money could buy, but it was exactly what she had dreamed of since childhood. Timeless, classic, perfect. "My God, Charlotte," Sarah from accounting, now one of her closest bridesmaids, whispered while adjusting the delicate veil. "You look absolutely stunning." Charlotte smiled, nervously touching the pearl necklace that had been Liam's wedding gift, a family heirloom that had belonged to his grandmother. It was his way of saying she was now part of the Kensington family history, that she had a permanent place in his legacy. "Nervous?" asked Margaret, who had become a maternal figure to Charlotte over the past few months. The older woman looked lovely in a navy blue dress, her eyes shining with pride. "Surprisingly, no," Charlotte replied, and realized it was true. Despite the magnitude of the moment, despite the 200 guests waiting downstairs, despite all the media attention the wedding had generated, she felt at peace. "It's strange, but I feel like this is exactly where I should be." A gentle knock on the door interrupted the moment. "Charlotte, dear, may I come in?" The voice belonged to Liam's father, Richard Kensington, a distinguished man in his 70s who had flown especially from London for the wedding. Over the past few months, he had become a warm and welcoming presence in Charlotte's life, clearly delighted with the woman who had captured his son's heart. "Of course, Mr. Kensington," Charlotte replied. Richard entered, elegant in his tuxedo, but stopped abruptly when he saw her. "My dear girl," he said softly, "you look absolutely radiant." "Thank you," Charlotte replied, feeling tears threatening to smudge her carefully applied makeup. "I came to bring something from Liam," Richard said, taking a small box from his jacket pocket. "He wanted you to have this before the ceremony." Inside the box was a pair of delicate diamond earrings and a handwritten card. With slightly trembling hands, Charlotte opened the card. "For the woman who transformed my house into a home, my life into an adventure, and my heart into something I didn't know it could be. In a few hours, you'll be my wife, but you're already my soulmate. Forever yours, Liam." "Oh," Charlotte whispered, pressing the card against her chest. "He's a bit nervous downstairs," Richard confessed, with an amused smile. "Marcus had to stop him from coming up here 3 times to check if you're okay. I think he still can't quite believe you said yes." Charlotte laughed, imagining Liam pacing nervously downstairs. "How is he?" "Like a man who's about to marry the love of his life," Richard replied. "Scared, ecstatic, and completely in love." 15 minutes later, Charlotte was arm in arm with Richard, who had offered to walk her down the aisle when he learned her own parents had passed away years before, at the top of the Plaza ballroom stairs. The sight that awaited her took her breath away. The ballroom had been transformed into a magical winter garden. Arrangements of white roses, eucalyptus, and soft lights created an intimate atmosphere despite the size of the space. 200 candles flickered like stars, and rose petals formed a path to the improvised altar in front of the large windows overlooking Central Park. But Charlotte barely noticed the stunning decoration. Her eyes were immediately drawn to the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle. Liam stood beside the officiant, wearing a tuxedo that had been custom-made for him. His hair was perfectly styled, but Charlotte could see he had run his hands through it nervously. And when their eyes met across the crowded room, the smile that lit up his face was so radiant that Charlotte felt her heart stop for a moment. The music began, a soft version of All of Me, played by a string quartet, and Charlotte began her walk toward the future. With each step, she saw familiar faces smiling at her. Colleagues from Kensington & Co., friends she had made over the past few months, powerful executives who had become acquaintances. But her eyes kept returning to Liam, who watched her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever seen. When they finally reached the altar, Richard gently kissed Charlotte's cheek and placed her hand in Liam's. "Take good care of her," he whispered to his son. "Forever," Liam promised, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's face. The officiant, a retired judge who had been a friend of the Kensington family for decades, smiled warmly at them. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Liam and Charlotte in marriage." But Charlotte barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Liam's dark eyes, in the firm grip of his hands, in the surreal reality that after everything they had faced, the scandal, the separation, the pain, the reconciliation, they had finally arrived here. "Liam and Charlotte have chosen to write their own vows," the judge announced. "Liam!" Liam took a deep breath, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. But when he looked at Charlotte, he folded the paper again and put it away. "I wrote pages," he began, his voice clear and strong, trying to find the right words to express what you mean to me. But the truth is, there aren't enough words in English or any language for that. He took both her hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. Charlotte, you saved me. Not just from a lonely life or superficial relationships, but from myself. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that loving someone more than yourself isn't loss of control, but the purest form of strength. Tears began to stream down Charlotte's face, but she didn't care about her makeup. I promise never to run again when things get difficult. I promise to fight for us, for this love, against anything that tries to separate us. I promise to be your partner in all adventures, your comfort in all storms, and your biggest supporter in all dreams. His voice broke slightly as he added, and I promise never again to doubt the only truth I've ever known. You. When it was Charlotte's turn, she also discarded the notes she had carefully prepared. Liam, she began, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Before you, I didn't know I was only living partially. I didn't know I was breathing with only half my lungs, loving with only half my heart. She squeezed his hands, anchored by the familiar touch. You taught me that real love isn't just the easy, beautiful moments. It's choosing to stay and fight when everything seems impossible. It's forgiving when it's hard, trusting when it's scary, and building something new on the scars of what was broken. Her voice grew stronger, more determined. I promise to be your strength when you feel weak, your courage when you're afraid, and your home when the world seems too harsh. I promise never to stop fighting for us, for this family we're creating, for this love that survived everything. She smiled through her tears. And I promise to always be the woman who's proud to stand by your side, in business, in life, and in all the adventures yet to come. The exchange of rings passed in an emotional haze. When Liam slid the simple platinum wedding band onto her finger next to the engagement ring, Charlotte felt like a final part of herself was finally falling into place. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, the judge announced with a smile, I pronounce you husband and wife. Liam, you may kiss your bride. Liam didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Charlotte closer, and when he kissed her, it was with all the passion, promise, and love between them. It was a kiss that sealed not just a marriage, but the survival of a love that had faced scandal, the past, and fear, and won. The ballroom exploded in applause, but Charlotte and Liam were lost in each other, in the miracle of finally, officially, belonging to one another. When they finally separated, Liam rested his forehead against hers. Hello, Mrs. Kensington, he whispered. Hello, husband, she whispered back. And then, hand in hand, they turned to face the world as a family, two survivors who had found not just love but redemption in each other's arms. Later that night, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife in the ballroom, now lit only by candles, Charlotte looked around at all the smiling faces watching them and realized something profound. She had started at Kensington & Co.'s as a desperate young woman looking for just a job, but she had found much more than a career. She had found her place in the world, her family, and a love that had proven strong enough to survive any storm. What are you thinking about? Liam murmured in her ear as they slowly swayed. How sometimes, Charlotte whispered back, the best stories begin with the simplest mistakes. Like walking into the wrong locker room? Like walking into the wrong locker room, she confirmed, smiling. Then here's to beautiful mistakes, Liam said, spinning her once before pulling her back into his arms. And to the happy endings they make possible, Charlotte completed. They had survived the storm, and now they belonged to each other, forever. And so, Charlotte discovered that sometimes the truest love is born from the most unexpected moments, that courage isn't never being afraid, but choosing to love even when everything seems impossible. That some people enter our lives like hurricanes and teach us we were capable of much more than we ever imagined. Because deep down, we all deserve a love that sees us, that fights for us, that chooses to stay. And perhaps, this story also speaks a little about us. If this journey touched you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where are you listening to this message from? Your support is what allows us to keep bringing stories that warm the heart.